This is episode 49 of the Ownstream podcast, featuring Marvin Rockwell.
Welcome to the Ownstream podcast. I'm Teresa Scova.
And I am Stephen Shelley.
And we're so excited to present this wonderful conversation with Marvin Rockwell. Wow. We had such an amazing day today with Marvin. What a unique episode this is. We learned of Marvin's story and of Marvin and his presence here in Monteverde, Costa Rica, where we are now, through a friend and a listener of the podcast when we were asking for suggestions of people to meet in Costa Rica. And she told us of a wonderful meal she had had with Marvin, and we immediately looked him up, and it's an amazing story. And, you know, he tells it beautifully. He's a, 95-year-old man from Alabama here, and he and a group of Quaker family members and friends started a community here in Costa Rica, Monteverde, in the early 50s, when there was very little here and very many fewer people living in the country. But what an amazing story. You know, they came here because they were Quakers and pacifists and were against violence and were against killing other human beings. And so they decided they had to leave the country. What else were they going to do with a mandatory draft? And after serving some prison time for refusing to join the army, they gathered their community together, and a number of them, some of them flew, but a number of them, including Marvin, drove to Costa Rica at a time when there were no complete roads. And he tells an amazing story of this 3-month journey from Alabama to Costa Rica and creating roads where there were none. I mean, this is really an Ownstream story, which is really about carving your own path when he describes just having that call inside, and it's like there was just no doubt he had to go, and he had absolute faith because he was following that call that everything would be taken care of.
Yeah, and talk about like carving your own path. I mean, at a certain point, as you'll hear Marvin describe, they're crossing the border from Nicaragua into Costa Rica, where there was really no road. And it took them a month to travel 12 miles because this was at the very tail end of the rainy season, and I think their vehicles just kept getting stuck over and over and over. They eventually did make it, and they settled in the town that we're staying in tonight, Monteverde, up in the mountains, where there is a glorious Cloud Park Reserve. Cloud Forest Reserve. So we're literally staying in the clouds, and the wildlife here is extraordinary. It's very unique. And what I wanted to do is just kind of set the scene for you as where this took place, because this is our second in-person interview. Third. So we've had Mike and Gina.
Hema here.
Oh, and Hema, of course, in Sedona. And now with Marvin. And so Monteverde is literally a town kind of climbing the side of this mountain. And like right now, you may be able to hear it while we're talking, but there's wind whipping up the side of this mountain. And in the background of our conversation with Marvin, there's some wind. You'll hear that. There's roosters. We're doing this in a patio at his home, behind which is a large kitchen, and we're preparing a meal for some folks to come this evening to spend some time with Marvin, hearing his stories and learning more about Costa Rica, Monteverde, and everything happening here. So you'll hear, kitchen sounds in the background. But we're surrounded by this lush, glorious green landscape. They've turned every inch of their land into this just overflowing garden. And as you'll hear, Marvin talks about how he's been farming this land for half a century, but there's kids running around. It's a family home, and Marvin just kind of came out, sat down, and what Marvin is a storyteller, and he tells a story, and we ask questions here and there, but really this is an episode where he's front and center. The spotlight is on him, and he knows that, and he takes it, and he tells his story. And you'll hear him throughout this episode as well refer to photographs. And he has a couple of little those Ziploc bags with photographs in them, and he shares those with us as he's kind of walking through his story. And many of those we took pictures of ourselves, and we will put them in the show notes just below where the episode will play on the page, ownstream.co/Marvin Rockwell. If you scroll down, we will create a little gallery there of the photographs that Marvin shared with us during this really kind of amazing conversation.
Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to add, and I'm so glad you painted that picture, was just what a lovely afternoon it was. What a warm rapport there was with us and Marvin, and just like how wonderful it was sitting back and listening to his story, and how beautifully and lovingly and joyfully he tells it. He just had such a huge grin on his face, telling the adventures that they went through, and all of his love for his family and friends and the community he built here in Costa Rica and Costa Ricans. And it's just wonderful. This is exactly the kind of encounter and connection we had hoped to make when we were going to meet people to interview in Costa Rica. And it's a real joy to have met Marvin and his family and to present this episode.
Yeah, and a big shout out to my friend from Brooklyn, Katie Judkins Blankenship, who I know from Prospect Park. From years back, we had dogs that we would walk there, and the dogs became friends, so we became friends. Anyway, Katie and her husband, I think, honeymooned here in Costa Rica and met Marvin, and she wrote to me a month or so ago when we made it clear we were going to be traveling here that we had to meet Marvin. And so, of course, everybody knows Marvin, and we're staying in an Airbnb, and the person who owns this house knows Marvin and made a quick phone call, and before you know it, we had a date to meet Marvin.
Yeah, shout out to Mario Andres. It was a beautiful Airbnb and,
Thanks,
and connected us before we got here with Marvin. It was beautiful.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Mario. Yeah, this has been a real group effort, well worth it. So you're going to be listening to someone who really truly blazed a trail here that has since been followed by many, many people who have moved to Costa Rica. And I'm sure there may have been Americans who moved to Costa Rica before Marvin, but based on what you're about to hear, what they did here, what they created here, created a legacy, a very, very powerful presence of this wonderful Quaker community, and Marvin being the eldest one who is still alive and with us, telling his story. So sit back and enjoy. You're in for a real treat. We'll be back afterwards to wrap up, but until then, enjoy Marvin Rockwell.
I guess we can officially start. Welcome, Marvin, to the podcast. It's such a joy to be here with you, here at your home in Monteverde. And we were just getting started. Marvin has been giving talks for a long time about his amazing story and the founding of this town here in Costa Rica. And he was just getting started telling us about how there became a Monteverde and how we ended up here. So I'll just pass that microphone back to you to get started, and we'll jump in with questions. And
Well, four of us in the Fairhope, Alabama Quaker meeting, Society of Friends meeting, refused to register for the draft law in 1948. So we were sentenced to a year and a day in prison. And we were actually in prison for a third of the sentence, out on parole the balance. So after we were released from prison, we and others in the meeting got to talking about it, decided, well, maybe we better leave the United States. Yeah. See if we can find someplace a little less militaristic. So we considered various places. We thought about Canada, but from southern Alabama, don't think we want to go where it's so cold. And Australia and New Zealand, too far away. We couldn't get back to visit friends and relatives. So we thought, maybe there's something in Central America. So one couple of the group that was interested in moving came with a tour visiting all the countries of Central America. And they returned and said, Costa Rica is much better than any of the other Central American countries. More stable government, better economy, the rich are not as rich and the poor are not as poor, and they abolished their army in 1948.
Perfect timing.
So we decided that Costa Rica would be our destination. So 7 families of us in Fairhope, Alabama, sold our possessions there and came to Costa Rica. Most of the group flew down and shipped their goods by ship. But my sister's family drove a truck, and I drove a Jeep and trailer. We thought there was a Pan-American highway.
Right.
So our prison sentences terminated on October 27th, and we started for Costa Rica on November 4th.
Wow.
You were ready to go.
So we had completed our sentences, so the government had nothing against us. So most of us have kept our U.S. citizenship. And so we started out, got to the U.S.-Mexican border, and the U.S. customs officials asked me for the export license for the Jeep I was driving. Uh-oh, I didn't have one.
What's that you say?
So I had to sit in Laredo, Texas, while I applied to Washington for an export license, which took about 10 days. And there'd been a boy who wanted to be out of the country before his 18th birthday to give him a little more time to decide whether he was going to register or not, had flown on down to Monterey and were waiting for us to catch up with him. So when I had to wait in Laredo, the truck and the rest of the gang went on down to Monterey to be with him while they were waiting for me to catch up with him. And so after I got the export license, I crossed the border. By that time, it was getting a little late, and so I started down, and I was tired and getting late. So I pulled over next to the side of the road, and curled up on the Jeep seat, went to sleep to the serenade of the coyotes. Then next day, come on down to Monterey and joined the rest of the gang. None of us knew any Spanish, hardly any at least. And my cousin thought he knew a little bit. And he asked the boy there at the camp, ¿Cómo se llama usted? What's your name?
Right.
And the boy answered, Kenyo. So for the rest of the time they were there, they called him Kenyo.
Oh, that's great. Kenyo.
So we come on down to Mexico City to get transit visas for Guatemala and El Salvador, and started down. Mexico had their part of the Pan-American Highway built to the Guatemala border, but Guatemala didn't have anything connecting with it. This picture was taken close to Oaxaca.
Aha. Oh, wow. Yeah. This is a little camp. It looks like you're setting up camp with everybody. And this is the Jeep?
Yep.
We'll snap a quick picture of this for
Okay.
our guests to see it. But
Sure.
Yeah. It looks like a Jeep.
Yeah, it was an Army surplus Jeep,
Uh-huh.
and it wasn't really mine, but my brother had bought it, and but he had a family of 4 small children, so he didn't want to drive it down with 4 small children. So he put the Jeep in my name, and so I drove it down.
That's That works.
So, well, Guatemala had a road to the border at Tapachula down near the Pacific coast. Mexico didn't have a road connecting with it.
Yeah, what did you do?
All they had was a railroad. So finally we had to put the vehicles on flat cars and go on this rickety narrow gauge railroad for 200 miles in southern Mexico.
Wow.
Wow.
And this is the locomotive.
Wow.
Right.
We'll take a picture of these.
Yeah.
And
200
So-
miles. That's a good trip.
yeah,
That's a
it was a good many hours. And I don't very often tell this, but when we got ready to unload the vehicles off the flat cars, the track was on a curve, and the unloading ramp was at the end of the track. I had to back the trailer with a Jeep over 7 flat cars on a curve to get to the unloading ramp.
Wow.
Oh.
Wow. I can.
Imagine you hadn't done that before.
Oh my goodness.
Well, we got into Guatemala, and roads were not very good, but passable. Beautiful country there.
Hmm.
We went past Lake Atitlan, which is a beautiful lake. And the Pan American Highway through El Salvador was all paved. And across the corner of Honduras was a good gravel road.
Mm-hmm.
So then we crossed into Nicaragua, arrived at the customs station at the border. They wanted us to unload everything out of the truck and trailer to inspect. We didn't want to do that. Well, they said the only alternative would be to have a letter from the American ambassador giving them permission to seal the vehicles and let us take them to Managua to be inspected. So we sent a telegram to the American ambassador. Next morning, he had a telegram back
Wow.
telling the guards to seal us and let us go.
Nice.
Wow.
So we drove into Managua, went to the customs house, and ushered into the general's office, the head of customs. And, are you the Quakers we've been expecting? we admitted that we were Quakers. He said if there was anything he could do to help us, just let him know. Sent us on our way, never even looked at the vehicles.
Oh wow. Yeah, of course.
Wow.
Of course.
So then we came on down to the Nicaragua-Costa Rica border. Again, the road ended. So we went back to San Juan del Sur, port on the Pacific coast of Nicaragua, to see whether we could put the vehicles on ship and ship them from there to Punta Arenas. But it turned out to be impossible. So finally, my sister's family, all but the 2 older boys, which are 2 of the 4 of us that were in prison, flew from Managua to San Jose. And my 2 nephews and the cousin that was coming down with us and I then came back to the border and started making our way through. And it took us 1 month to travel 12 miles.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Must have
Where
been
did you-
fairly, oh yeah,
Wow.
very dense.
So you were just kind of creating your own roads.
Just,
Right.
just forging ahead.
We crossed the border, drove a couple hundred yards, and the truck
Wow.
got stuck in the mud.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
So we spent the rest of the day to get it out of the mud. So we thought, well, maybe we better camp by the river here for 2 or 3 days and give it a chance to dry out a little more before we try to go any further. Because it was just the end of the rainy season when we first crossed. So we pulled over next to the river and went down and went swimming. When we came up from going swimming, a man said, "You better not swim in that river. There's sharks in the river."
Sharks.
And couldn't be. Next morning we went down to go swimming. Saw this fin going up the river and back down. Yes, there are sharks in that river. Turns out that about 10 miles down from where we camped, the river empties into Lake Nicaragua. And Lake Nicaragua is the only place in the world where there are freshwater sharks.
Wow. Interesting.
They're bull sharks. Apparently, they came up the San Juan River from the Caribbean, became acclimatized to the freshwater, and stayed.
Wow. Wow.
So we didn't swim anymore.
That was very-
Wow.
On that 12-mile stretch, there were a couple of places that we drove through pastures. One place we cut down trees and made sort of a corduroy road across a swampy place. Another place we drove up a creek bed a little ways. Another place we built a little bridge over a gully. Finally got across. Arrived in La Cruz, Costa Rica on February 1st, 1951. So our passports say, leaving Nicaragua, January 1st, 1951. Arriving Costa Rica, February 1st, 1951. Apparently we weren't anywhere for a month.
Did you know where you were going in Costa Rica? Did you know where you were headed?
Did you have a destination?
Yeah, for San Jose.
For San Jose, the
okay.
capital.
The group of us had asked the Costa Rican government for residence visas and told them that we wanted to come and farm. So the Costa Rican government had given us residence visas before we left the United States.
Uh-huh.
So we were looking for farmland. And we soon found that the land in the Central Valley near San Jose was too expensive. And we found we wanted to be in high elevation for two reasons. One, to be above the zone of the mosquitoes that carry malaria and yellow fever, and the other, the cooler climate, so you feel like doing something.
Yeah, of course.
So we found that the land was too expensive in the Central Valley. And this is a picture of the four of us that made the whole trip by land. I'm on the left.
Wow.
And so as the group was moving down, we rented houses or apartments in or near San Jose while we were looking for land. And there was a man, Andres Sally, had a coffee beneficio in San Francisco de Heredia, and also had a piece of property at Cañas Gordas, down close to the Panamanian border, which he thought we might be interested in. So he let a couple of our families camp on the patios of the coffee beneficio to save money. And we had the use of the house there. So on Sundays, we would have our meeting for worship, potluck dinner together, and talk over the places that we'd seen during the week. The man in the center of the picture there is my father.
Oh, wow.
No kidding.
My father and mother were among the original group that came down. They flew down, so they got to Costa Rica before I did.
How old were you when you embarked upon the...
I was 28.
28.
Uh-huh. And
And how many of you were there?
Total?
let's see, there were 32 of us from Fairhope, and while we were looking for land, 4 more families joined us, so there were 44 original founders of what we named Monteverde. And of the original 44, there's still 5 of us here. I'm the oldest, and the youngest is the wife of a Costa Rican that they own the El Establo Hotel.
Oh,
Oh, cool.
Right near where we're staying.
Yeah. Nice.
So, so we wanted to go see this land at Tañas Gordas. But to get there in 1951, you had to fly from San Jose to Golfito because there was no road.
Right.
Go by Banana Company Railroad to Villanelli, by jeep up in the mountains, and horseback to the land through the mud. And
Wow.
so when we got to the land, we found there were deep ravines in it, and the problem of getting anything to market with no road to the central part of the country, we decided this is not the place for us.
Yeah.
So we didn't buy there. Another man took us to look at a piece of land called La Suiza, south from Turrialba, south from San Jose. Good elevation on the Atlantic side of the bridge, but and he kept explaining, muy plano, very level. All the time we were hanging onto the trees, keep from falling down the ravines. No, that's not what we want.
Not quite right.
And then we were shown land in the San Carlos, but that's lowland. Man came to us and said he had a piece of property he wanted to sell us. So two of the group went with him to see what he had to offer. Turned out to be an hacienda down in Guanacaste, lowland. And we told him, we're not interested in lowland. Well, he had flown between Guanacaste and San Jose and had seen this sort of a shelf on the side of the mountain here. So he investigated and found that the title of the land was owned by the Guatemala Land Company. That came about because about 1900, a group of men wanted to build a hydroelectric plant in Guatemala to furnish electricity for the gold mines of Avangares and the town of Punta Arenas. So the government gave them title to all of the watershed of the Guatemala River, which is a tremendous area, including where we are right now. So this man went to the Guatemala Land Company, got an option for the title for a piece of land up here, came up and got options from some of the larger squatters holdings because Costa Rican families had come in and come up the mountain and had cleared and established farms on the land here. And then he came to us again and brought three of the group by jeep to Guatemala and by horseback from Guatemala up because it was just an ox cart trail. That was on April 19th, 1951. So they came back and reported the rest of the group, and we decided this is the place for us.
Oh, wow.
So we made a deal for a tract of land of about 3,400 acres.
Wow.
And set aside about a third of it at the headwaters of our little river to be left in forest as a watershed. And then the rest of it was divided into farms, and each family chose a farm or farms that they liked and could afford. And the farms were deeded to the individuals. So the only land that was kept as community property was the watershed and the schoolhouse meeting house grounds.
Yes.
And so then we went to work on the road, brought the first jeeps up with help.
Wow.
Yeah, we almost needed help getting up the road just a few days ago. It's an experience.
Wow.
Look at that. Oh my goodness.
Wow.
And so then we started moving up. Some families moved into squatters' houses similar to that.
Did you build all of this yourself? Had you done any of this before?
What?
type of thing? Built homes or?
Oh, well, I had done most of the work of building my own little house garage on a part of my parents' property in Fairhope. So
And had
it
you
was
farmed
nothing new.
before? Had you farmed before? Was that something?
No, I was born on a farm,
Uh-huh.
but my father lost the farm in the Depression in 1930
Uh-huh.
and moved into town and started a baby chick hatchery.
Oh, nice.
So I grew up with baby chicks. So some of the families built platforms and put tents on to live in until we could build more permanent residence. And that's the tent that my parents and I lived in for 6 months when we first came up.
Oh, wow.
So we got up here, and the road was so bad, we thought, maybe we ought to have an airstrip for emergencies, maybe just for transport.
Wow.
So we looked over the land that we'd purchased and decided on this strip of land. It's long enough, not too steep. It ought to do for an airstrip. So we cut the trees on it. And I started taking pilot's training in this Piper Super Cub.
Oh, my goodness.
And after I had a few hours training, my instructor and I came up to make an approach to the, quote, airstrip that still had the stumps on it, not intending to get close. So that's close enough. Gave it gas to lift off, losing elevation, more gas, losing elevation. So we whipped down and got out. Well, what's going on here? What happens is the prevailing winds come from the northeast. They hit the mountains and they go up and they come down. So you just push a plane into the ground.
I see.
And to make it even more interesting, the end of the strip was right at the cliff edge.
Wow.
So we said, no airstrip for Monteverde. So we never cleared the stumps off of it.
Uh-huh.
But just at that time, the Geodetic Survey was taking aerial photographs, mapping Costa Rica. And you look at one of those photographs, they've got an airstrip, you can measure it.
Oh, wow.
So ever since, on the aeronautical maps of Costa Rica, it shows an airstrip in Monteverde, which never was.
Oh, that's great.
At least now it's marked as an abandoned airstrip.
And if you can hear in the background, there's quite a lot of wind. We're up. How high up is Monteverde?
About, let's see, about 4,200 feet or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty high up.
Yeah.
And there's a great deal of wind up here. I would think it'd be very tricky to put a plane on a narrow airstrip.
So we had a friend's school in Fairhope, Alabama, and among the group coming down was the school teacher. So she just kept on teaching school when she got to Costa Rica.
Wow.
So we've had a friend's school ever since we came. So the Monteverde Friends School is celebrating 66 years
Wow.
this year.
Oh, that's great.
And you have families move here to come to the school as well, right?
Yes.
And
We
we had a
had-
friend who was interested, actually. A friend of ours from New York. He ended up moving to Tamarindo instead of Brasilito.
Brasilito.
But he was looking at the school. He first learned of the school then.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And it's still here, 66 years later. How many students does it serve now?
I think there's about 120.
Uh-huh.
It's
But at the time, it was just your kids,
Yeah,
or did
yeah.
you begin to involve the community?
not the first years.
Yeah.
It was, well, maybe 5 years after we came, we had some local Costa Ricans come to
Yeah.
our school. And
Uh-huh.
in the early years, I gave a class in carpentry in the school, and somewhere I had a picture of a little Costa Rican boy that had built a chair with my help.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
But it's probably on my computer someplace, but
Uh-huh.
I don't know where it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got up here. So we got together to decide what we could produce for a cash income for the majority of the group.
Uh-huh.
And it had to be something of high value for the weight, not too perishable because of the bad road. And 3 of the families had had dairy farms in the States and liked dairying. Fluid milk was totally impossible. Couldn't get it to market. So we decided on cheese.
Yes, right.
Of course, the cheese factory.
That's right.
So we bought 50 purebred Guernsey heifer calves from herds in the Central Valley of the country, brought them up a few at a time in the backs of the Jeeps,
Wow.
and while they were growing, organized the corporation Productores de Monteverde Sociedad Anónima. And this is
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
We saw this is your sign. We saw it on the cheese
Right.
factory.
right.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's great.
So when these calves grew up and ready to start producing milk, we built a little factory building, bought a second-hand wood-burning boiler to produce the steam to pasteurize the milk, and a 200-gallon cheese vat made in Wisconsin. And that was one big job to get up the mountain.
I bet. How much
And that's
did it
my-
weigh?
Huh?
How much did it weigh? That's huge.
Would it weigh? Well, it was more a problem of bulk than weight.
Just the size of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the man pouring his milk into the vat in the picture is my father. The picture was taken on the first day of production of the plant,
Yeah.
the 8th of April, 1954. And
Wow.
for molds, we used Quaker Oats cans.
Right.
Perfect.
So the first week's production was about 200 pounds. The company now produces something over 8,000 pounds a day.
Ah,
Wow.
So it has grown.
yes, it has grown.
This is a picture of the squatter's house that was on the land where the cheese factory is now. And yeah. So in the shed back there in the background, we had a sawmill, which we kept going all daylight hours, sawing out lumber to build our houses with. And a little generator, which we hooked up the wires to a couple of the houses close by, so they had a little bit of electricity for a few hours in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
Most of Monteverde had no electricity. So for lights, we used candles and kerosene lamps, cooked on wood-burning stoves, everything by hand. Then in 1957, another couple came down, brought a 75-kilowatt generator. And he was a machinist. He built a Pelton wheel and welded up pipe and dug a ditch around the mountainside and installed this nice little hydroelectric plant. So the whole community has had electricity since
Oh,
1957.
wow, nice. That's great.
Wow.
And
That's great.
Issei, the local supplier, came into the area about 1980. So it's many years.
Wow.
Yeah. Was it called Monteverde, or did you?
We gave it the name
Gave it the
Monteverde.
Yeah,
It makes sense.
it does.
It was,
Perfect.
yeah,
Perfect.
it was what they called this part up here when we first came up was Cerro Plano, but they still call it where just where the paving begins.
Yes.
And the Santa Elena
Yeah.
was they had a little school and church. No, I don't know whether they had a church. Up beyond the what's now the plaza, the football field.
There's a field there. Yeah. Yeah.
And where the center of Santa Elena is now was just a house and a pasture.
Uh huh. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And these so Monteverde now has a lot of parks and reserves, and you must have been
famous for that.
it's become a real tourist attraction for
Yeah.
all of that.
That's
You must have been amazed at the wildlife here. Coming from Alabama, and then you're suddenly surrounded by monkeys and toucans and all
Yeah.
these amazing birds.
all
It's
that stuff.
huge. It's
About
amazing.
1968, a young man, George Powell, came to do research here for his doctorate in ornithology and became very interested in the ecosystems, which he found on the upper edge of Monteverde. So he contacted World Wildlife Fund and Nature Conservancy and Centro Científico Tropical and other donors and received donations to purchase land adjoining our watershed. And it was put in the name of the Centro Científico Tropical. So we leased our watershed to them on a 90-year lease for 1 colon a year. So it could be part of the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve, which was started in 1972 with an area of about 5,000 acres. With donations since, it's been enlarged to about 26,000 acres. And a few years later, a young woman, Sharon Kinsman, came to do research here. When she left, she traveled around showing slides and giving lectures on the rainforest. She was giving her slides and lectures in a school in Sweden. And the children just got excited about the need to save the rainforest. So they started doing work projects and making things to sell. Other schools in Sweden heard about it and started doing the same thing. And the Swedish government agreed to match whatever the children raised.
Oh, that's wonderful.
They sent a large sum of money to the Monteverde Conservation League to buy rainforest. So they did. They bought a tract of land on the backside of the reserve, and they called it the Swedish Children's Rainforest. But almost immediately, they started receiving funds from children all over the world.
Oh, wow.
So they bought more land and changed the name of all of their holdings to the Children's Eternal Rainforest.
Beautiful.
That's
So
great.
beautiful.
And they now hold title to something over 90,000 acres,
Wow.
largest private reserve in Central America.
Yeah.
Wow.
We've seen the signs.
And so this is the map of the area.
Yes.
The blue is Lake Arenal. The purple is Arenal Volcano National Park. The light green is the Children's Eternal Rainforest. The dark green in the center is the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve. Little brown area just above it is the Santa Elena Cloud Forest Reserve, which is taken care of by the public high school here in Santa Elena. And a dark green on the lower right is a reserve taken care of by the University of Costa Rica. So you can see there's a tremendous amount of land under protection now.
Yeah.
But nearly all of it is on the Atlantic side of the ridge. So what the conservation organizations are working on now is trying to establish corridors into the lowlands on the Pacific side. So, yeah. Now I come to a change.
Oh. We have lots of questions for you.
Yeah.
We ask you now or after?
In the Second World War, I was drafted, wouldn't carry a weapon, so they put me in the medical corps.
And they let you do that in that case. That was before the law, right? In 1948. Like you were able
Yeah,
to say you
in the
wouldn't
Second
carry
World
weapons.
War.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
I was trained as a surgical technician,
Yeah.
which that training was very valuable when we first came up here,
Yeah.
because the closest doctor was Punta Arenas, 6 hours away by jeep. So I was called on by all our Costa Rica neighbors in our community and everybody in the area for all manner of medical problems. So I sewed up innumerable cuts and injuries, put casts on broken arms, gave intravenous medication when it was required, treated people for everything from the common cold to pneumonia.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I got very well acquainted with the Catholic priests that came up once a month to say Mass and marry couples and baptize the babies. After we'd been up here about 3 years, he told me there'd been 5 little boys that their parents had named Marvin.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, that's great. Boy. That's beautiful. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's amazing.
Wow.
That's amazing.
So about 6 years after we came, another family joined the community, and the wife of the family was a registered nurse. So she took over the treatment of the family medical problems.
Yes.
When we first started the cheese factory, whoever was going to San Jose with a vehicle loaded up the cheese that was ready to sell, took it to San Jose and peddled it out to some of the larger stores and stalls in the market. But as production increased, we found we had to have a full-time distributor. So after 8 years here, I sold my farm, bought a little truck, and moved to San Jose and contracted with the cheese company to distribute the cheese. So I lived in San Jose and distributed the cheese for 9 years.
Wow.
And this little van, this little English Thames Ford, was the first vehicle to have the name Monteverde painted on it.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I had a young Costa Rican man helping me. So in 1960, I needed another vehicle. So I bought this international van from the agency here in San Jose. But I took delivery at the factory in Ohio and drove it down.
Oh, wow.
But by that time, there was a Pan American Highway all the way. So it only took me 2 weeks. This van had 4-wheel drive, lock differential, winch, and I put chains on to come up in the rainy season. One time, I got it stuck so deep in a mud hole that I had to climb out the window.
Wow.
Wow.
And I had to get a crawler tractor to come and pull it out of the mud.
Yeah. Sure. So you were in San Jose for 9 years, and then you came back here.
I'm getting to that.
Yeah.
And one evening I went to the house of this young man that was helping me distribute the cheese. And his mother was taking care of this baby boy. Little fellow was undernourished in need of love and care. At 1.5 years, his teeth were decaying.
Oh, jeez.
And so I found that the mother was unwed and saw the little fellow maybe once a month. So I went and talked to her, convinced her to give him to me to adopt. So she signed papers. And I went to the welfare agency, and they sent a worker out to interview me and see my home and approved the adoption. So I adopted this little 1.5-year-old boy. This is a picture of him about a year later. And
Oh, jeez.
usually I let my wife talk for a little while now, but I don't know where she is. Anyway, a few years before that, a Quaker couple from La Jolla, California, came to the area and bought a farm here. And he was a horticulturalist. He planted ornamental plants and trees to sell. When he had plants ready to sell, he rented a house behind the airport as a place to sell his plants. And his wife got acquainted with this girl that lived the second house down from the one they'd rented. Thought she was such a nice girl. Told her, "You're such a nice girl. You ought to have a good husband. Not a Tico, they're too macho." And then she started telling this girl about me. And then she invited the three of us to a Sunday dinner. 5 months later, we were married.
The rest, as they say, is history. Oh, that's great. That's beautiful.
We were married on my bride's 22nd birthday,
Wow.
and I was 40.
Wow.
So after we were married, my wife went through the procedure of adopting the little boy as well. Then we had 2 little boys born to us, living in San Jose, and my wife not speaking hardly any English. The boys were not getting their English, and I wanted to be totally bilingual. So I decided to take the family back to the States for a few years to learn English. So I got a job selling chocolate in the Midwest United States. My territory was from West Virginia and Ohio to Kansas and Nebraska, and from Kentucky and Missouri to the Canadian border. And I drove 1,000 miles a week for 6 years. And we moved to a little town just outside Indianapolis because I had a niece who had grown up in Monteverde and knew very good Spanish, so that she had married a boy in the area and was living in this town. So we went to that town so my wife would have somebody that could help her, because she didn't know how to drive. She was by herself, and as you can see, very small children, by herself all from Monday to Friday. So but then Christmas time of 1970, we came down to visit our families, and my wife wanted a daughter, but my family goes very heavily to boys. I had one sister and 4 brothers. One brother had 2 sons. Another brother had 2 sons. Another brother had 2 sons and 1 daughter. And we had 2 sons, beside the adopted son. So we adopted a little Costa Rican girl, 13 months old. And so she's the mother of Nicole here.
Yes. Beautiful. Oh, look.
Oh, that's great.
Oh.
So after 6 years and the whole family learned English, we came back to Monteverde. I worked a couple of years as production manager in the cheese factory. And then we built a little hotel and run it for 22 years. Sold it about 14 years ago. We had that, the name of the little hotel was Pension Flormar. That is the original sign that we had for it.
Yeah. It's great.
Oh, beautiful.
The Flor for Flory and Mar for Marvin.
Oh, it's
Very
perfect.
good.
So 5 years ago, our 4 children came to help us celebrate. So celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary. And so the 12th of this month, we celebrated our 55th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
And
Congratulations.
Wow, that's amazing.
Beautiful.
this is what I did after I was 90.
Zip lining.
Zip lining.
We'll
to
get
the
a few of these
canopy.
pictures. We'll take
Absolutely.
some pictures for our listeners. This is awesome. Definitely this one.
Oh, that's great. Fantastic.
I have to ask you, like, how did you do it? With so many, it was so different from anything you'd ever known. I
Yeah.
imagine. You went
Well-
off. A lot of people are moving here now, right? But you decided that you were going to do this, and you built your own roads. You went somewhere you knew nothing about. You created a community out of nothing. Like, how did you make that decision to go into the unknown
Well-
like that?
Had faith in God and
Yeah.
to do whatever came up.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
and so I have done a lot of things since after all of this. In about 1976, Michael Kay, the president of Costa Rica Expeditions, came to Central America and started a river rafting business. And 1979, he had a group that wanted to come up to the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve after river rafting. So he called the Centro Científico Tropical for the same name of somebody that could guide the group in the reserve. They gave him my name. So he called me and asked, Marvin, can you guide a group in the reserve? I guess so. So I did. A couple of weeks later, he called. I've got another group going up there. Can you guide them too? Yep. No hesitation.
Oh, wow.
About a month later, I called and said, I've got a group going to Santa Rosa as well as Monteverde. Can you guide them up there too? I guess so. So I did. Well, as a result, I worked 10 years as a naturalist guide for Costa Rica Expeditions,
Wow.
taking groups all over the country to all the national parks and
Wow.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Beautiful.
and one time I had some groups from international expeditions that I guided. I would meet the group at the airport and be with them the whole time they were in Costa Rica till I took them back to the airport. So this international expedition group, we were sitting around the table one evening talking about places we'd like to visit. I said, the place at the top of my wish list was the Amazon. And one couple of the group said, well, they were booked a little later in the year for a trip to the Amazon with international expeditions. Now they would see if they could get me put on as tour conductor.
Oh, cool. As tour conductor.
So they wrote to International Expedition. I wrote to them, and Michael Kay wrote to them. Got a message back. We already have a tour conductor for that trip to the Amazon. But could you take a 3-week trip going to the Galapagos, the highlands of Peru, and the Peruvian Amazon?
Oh, wow.
I guess so. So I did. Wonderful trip.
Wow.
It happened that when we were out on the islands, the Galapagos Islands, they were celebrating 10 years of being a province of Ecuador. So the president of the country of Ecuador, Leon Fabre, was out on the island. And we met him on one of the islands. So we stopped and chatted with him. And
Yeah.
so
Beautiful.
Wow. It sounds like you have a deep, abiding faith that allows you to open and just be open to opportunities as they come and say yes to things.
There's Professor Gordon Franke of University of California, Berkeley, that brought groups of graduate students down for 2-week study vacation sort of thing. And he asked me to be the professor of ornithology for the groups. And so I did. Well, a little over a year ago, a professor from Clemson University, South Carolina, wanted to get my email address. And so they gave it to him. And he sent me an email. And
Oh, wow.
said he had discovered a new species of beetle from Monteverde. And so he has named it Rockwelly. He remembered me after 20 years.
Wow. Stephen's dad would love this.
Yeah, my father is he's a specialist in millipedes and centipedes. He's traveled the world studying and researching and finding and discovering. And so each of us in the family has a few millipedes and or centipedes named after them. Because you got to name them something, and you kind of work Stephen in there somehow.
So this is Rockwelly.
Yeah, the name of the name.
Yeah. Encusoma Rockwelly.
Great.
That's wonderful.
In 2002, my wife and I were going to go up to visit our 3 sons and families. At that time, all 3 sons were in Southern California. And so I said, if I'm ever going to see the big animals of Africa, I better get at it. So I started figuring itineraries. My wife didn't like to fly. She said, I'm not going. So I, a few months before that, a Quaker couple from La Jolla, Quaker couple from England had visited here in Monteverde, said if I ever got to England to go visit them. So when I decided I was going to make the trip, I sent them an email, immediately got an email back, said when I get to Heathrow, get on the bus, go into London, go to the railroad station, buy a ticket to Macclesfield, get on the telephone, tell them what train I was going to be on. So I did, They met me at the train station, took me home with them, and I spent 3 wonderful days in northern England. Then I took the train back to London, went to the youth hostel. I was only 80. And after a day of sightseeing in London, took the plane to Nairobi, Kenya. Arrived at the airport with no plans whatsoever. And walking down the concourse of the airport, looking at the safari company offices. Young man come up to me and asked me what I was looking for. I said a cheap safari. So he took me around to a little safari company, but they didn't have anything I wanted. But I finally hired him to take me for 2 days to Masai Mara National Park. Just he and I.
Uh-huh.
And so we went in a Toyota RAV4.
Oh, wow.
And we saw a lot of the animals, and the car broke down. Oh, right. So we fixed it. Then when we came back to Nairobi, I had him take me to the youth hostel in Nairobi. And next morning I come down to the office. And young lady at the from Prime Time Safari was there. We got to talking. I said I particularly want to visit Amboseli National Park because Cynthia Moss has been head of the elephant project there
Right.
for many years, and her mother lived here in Monteverde.
Oh, really? Cynthia
And-
Moss's mother lived here.
Uh-huh.
Was she part of your community?
Yeah.
Oh, no kidding. Fascinating. My mother, who's with us, she's actually staying with our daughter right now. Has traveled to Africa many times and loves the work of Cynthia Moss. Oh, she'll be delighted to hear that.
And so, well, they had a safari going to a couple of other parks in Masai Mara and Amboseli. Okay, I'll go. So they furnished transportation, guides, the works, slept in sleeping bags on the ground in tents. Cost me $55 a day. And I saw all the big animals and had a wonderful time.
I'm sure.
Very close.
Yeah, yeah. The pictures are great. Amazing. You know, I have to ask, this all started with a decision to not opt into a draft, this whole adventure. And were all Quaker men kind of adopting that, or was that unique to you?
No, some of the Quaker men accepted service in work camps.
Ah,
There were some that were volunteers or medical experiments in hospitals, some that refused.
yeah.
And in the Second World War, I wouldn't carry a rifle, but I was willing to serve in the medical corps, which turned out to be very valuable for
Sure.
when we came out down here. So,
What caused you to just fully opt out? You just didn't believe that was it based on what you saw in World War II?
well, we believe, the Quakers, the Society of Friends, believe that all people are equal and should be treated equally. And there's a spark of the divine in every person. And under no circumstances should we take the life of another person.
Yes.
And so,
And then you organized a group to come here. What was the aim? Was the aim to create
just to farm and start a community in a more peaceful place to raise our children.
Yes.
And tell us about Costa Rica, like what it was like, and because they had just abolished their army. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like
Very,
what,
very.
what
Then-
was the culture like, the police culture?
Well, when we first came, the total population of Costa Rica was 800,000 people.
Wow.
Now it's over 5 million.
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing.
And it's interesting that the let's see, it was the 48 election, I think, that the president of the country, the election went to the opposition. So the one in power, which leaned toward communism,
Uh-huh.
wouldn't let him take office.
Oh.
So Jose Figueres, who was a young man, had been trained at West Point as an officer.
Uh-huh.
And he led the revolution and won. And so when they were going to make a new constitution and start over again, he was the one most adamant that Costa Rica should not have an army. I thought that was amazing, that he had been trained in West Point.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And yet he was the one that was adamant that Costa Rica should not have an army.
Yep. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and the man that legally won the election that wasn't allowed to take office was Otilio Latte. And after it had been 1952, I drove a Jeep to San Jose and parked at the side of the street and opened the Jeep door and almost hit a man on the sidewalk. So I got out to apologize. Well, it was the president of the country.
Oh my goodness.
So we chatted a while, and then he went his way and I went mine.
Aw.
Fantastic. Oh man, that's amazing. Boy, it's a different world. It's a different world.
And that culture has really stayed, right? I mean, that no army, you know,
Right.
that's kind of embedded in the culture now,
Uh-huh.
right? That's what a friend of ours told us, that
Mhm.
it's a peace-loving culture.
Yeah. It's now, what, 65, no, wait a minute, 65, 70 years? Wait a minute. 1948
1948,
had
2018,
the
70 years.
70 years
Yeah.
Yes, I
that
mean,
that Costa Rica has not had an army.
And isn't there there's a famous sign on the statue in San Jose which comments about how no mother in Costa Rica will ever fear that her son will die in a war. Which is unique across the world, I guess. There's
think
very
it is
few
unique.
places that have done what Costa Rica has done.
I don't know of any other country that has done it,
Yeah.
but Costa Rica has made a success of it.
Yeah. And so how, like, living here, what's it like here? What is it like to live here in Costa Rica? I mean, you probably don't think of it as different because you've been here so long.
Not particularly,
Yeah. Yeah.
no. When we first came, each of us, more or less, my brother decided that he would have a commissary in the community as his business. So he didn't have a big farm, just a small area.
Mm.
And I figured I was going to farm, so I had in the original division, I had a farm of about, I think it was about 25 acres. But I sold it when I took on the distribution of the cheese. And when I came back, I bought a piece here, about it was about 1 month. 1 month, Sana? No, not that big. A small lot.
Yeah.
And then I bought another section on that side of it and down below. So now I own all the way down to the river here in the forest.
You know, we're thinking about moving here now for some of the same reasons, and we want to start our own community, or have community. What do you think? It seems like it all happens so naturally for you. I'm curious about like what you learned through creating this community. What have you, to people like us kind of starting out, what would you say you learned?
Go for it.
Go for it.
Nice.
Good.
That's clear.
Why not, right?
Have faith in God and do what's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Well,
Perfect.
we have a few kind of questions we ask every guest on our podcast that we'll ask you now. And the first one I'm particularly interested in.
Yeah.
But most of our guests are avid readers, and I'm wondering and most of our listeners are, what book or books, say up to 3, what book or books, say up to 3 books, would you recommend every person should read?
I don't know if I did. My family goes back on the Quaker traditions for several generations. One of my great grandfathers was a Quaker missionary teacher to the Indians in New York State.
Uh-huh.
And his son, my great grandfather, was a Quaker missionary to the Indians in Indian Territory, Oklahoma and that area. And he wrote a book, The Adventures of a Quaker Among the Indians. And it was published by the Friends in 1880s and republished by the University of Oklahoma in 1950.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow. Fascinating. Fascinating. A Quaker amongst the Indians. Have you ever thought of writing a book?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I've started, but it's going kind of slow.
That's great.
And there was a chapter that in my great grandfather's book that wasn't printed in the Quaker edition, but it was added in the Oklahoma University edition.
Yeah.
So, very interesting. In the book, he told about one time, well, he had to travel from one area to another to visit different small tribes of the Indians. And there was one chief that had threatened to kill him. And he was on his way in his carriage to another group on beyond, and was going through this chief's territory. And here down in the valley here. It was getting late in the day. And down in the valley was the camp of this chief. So he drove down into the camp. The Indians had very strict moral traditions. If someone came to your camp, you took care of him. So this chief that had threatened to kill him made a vela of teepee for him, and he spent the night there, and they fed him and celebrated him. So when he got ready to leave the next day, the chief sent his wife and little boy with him to the edge of his territory to ensure his safety.
That's beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
So
Well, the second question we ask at the end of every podcast is if you could go back and talk to an earlier version of yourself, maybe the one about to leave the country for here, what would you tell him? You wouldn't.
no, I wouldn't change it.
Yeah. Anything you'd tell him out of encouragement, or you wouldn't need to. You were in total faith.
Doesn't sound like you needed any. Doesn't sound like you needed any.
Marvin was shaking his head to our
The whole
listeners.
time, like,
I
"Ah."
don't need to tell him anything.
You know, right?
It's perfect.
What excites you now? What's on your horizon?
I tell this story about the Monteverde. This month I have about 20 talks to give. And next month about the same number. And then it drops off. But I have scheduled some as in far in advance as 2019. So I better keep my health pretty good.
Oh, you have a lot to give people.
Yeah,
You give a lot.
It's beautiful.
It's really
Beautiful.
beautiful. Very inspiring. Very inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a wonderful life you've created.
I have. I've had a good life.
All right, that's it for this week's Ownstream podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this terrific interview with Marvin Rockwell. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode for links to everything mentioned, including various photographs that Marvin shared with us. We took pics of those and we'll post those on this episode's page. All of that can be found at ownstream.co/Marvin Rockwell. That's ownstream.co/MarvinRockwell.
Also, please sign up for our weekly tip-off email at ownstream.co and just click the sign up button in the upper right-hand corner. This is where we share each Monday 3 cool things we've learned in the last week in the areas of lifestyle, business, and spirit. This could be an amazing quote, individual, tip, or tool designed to bring you more freedom and power in your life. So definitely sign up for that again at ownstream.co and just click sign up.
Finally, please leave us a review on iTunes. We really need your help in expanding our reach, helping us to inspire more people and spread the amazing stories discussed on this episode with Marvin Rockwell and others too. If it feels right to you, simply go to iTunes, search for the Ownstream podcast, click ratings and reviews, then click that 5th star and leave us a brief comment on how this episode has inspired you. Thank you so much for considering that. We are very, very grateful. Also, we're on Twitter at Ownstream and on Instagram, where we post regularly at own_stream. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Ownstream podcast. To learn more and connect with us, please visit ownstream.co or follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and Instagram at own_stream.